Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Tony Fratto, managing partner with Hamilton Place Strategies. Tony, it is great to see you as always. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill. Great to be back.
All right, we have a lot that's going on in Washington as always, and let's start with President Biden's budget plan that he put out there. Stock buybacks are being targeted, of course, in the 2023 budget plan that was announced just on March 28th, which seeks to discourage corporations from using profits to repurchase stocks in order to benefit executives. It also introduced a new minimum tax requiring the very wealthy to pay at least 20% of income in taxes, including gains on investments that have not been sold. So, Tony, my question to you is this the right approach to fix the economy and get the budget under control?
Well, look, I mean, there is actually a lot of improvement in the budget coming, because we did these massive spending plans during COVID, which were absolutely necessary. But when you start throwing around $1 trillion of spending and those come off, the deficits are going to come down pretty significantly. For long-term budget impact, some effort to rationalize the tax code with spending, probably makes sense. This probably isn't the right way to do it. At any rate, it's not a way that's going to get through this Congress. There is this effort to try to get at wealth. The problem is that, the way that we tax in this country is to tax income. So, if you haven't realized those gains, is it really income? But of course, people are smart and they find ways to use unrealized gains to turn it into income with loans and other, using as collateral for other kinds of things. So lots of things you can do with it. So I get the impetus for it. To me, though, there are a lot of easier ways to do it. If you look at things like consumption taxes are, much easier, much smarter, cleaner, and simpler ways to get at wealth if that's what you want to go after. And so a lot more attention to consumption tax is probably where we're heading in the future to do it. These kinds of schemes are they're pretty complex. They don't pass a rationality test. You talk to a lot of tax experts. They can explain that there are ways to avoid this, and there are ways to where you lead to some pretty irrational situations in future years if you try to tax this way.
So, Tony, do you think this was put forth as a way to perhaps promote some progressive priorities?
No doubt. Look, hey, Jill, I was in I've been in administrations. We put out president's budgets 8 times. They're always aspirational. These are, if I was king of the world and not president of the United States, these are all the things that we would really love to do and the way we'd love to do them. So that's what you always look for in a president's budget, is the aspirational goal. And I don't like the moniker to say it's dead on arrival, because you shouldn't think about it that way, as though there was a likelihood that Congress was just going to pick it up and do something with it. And that's never been the case in my entire professional career of looking at presidents' budgets. They're aspirational. They talk about what the president's priorities are, what he thinks is important, and what he would do in a perfect world. It's not a perfect world. It's a pretty imperfect world, especially when you have to go and negotiate what that world's going to look like with Congress and a pretty divided Congress right now. So it's not going to look like this, but you do want to tell your supporters, the people who voted for you to become president, that these are the kinds of things that you think are important.
Right. And Tony, I'm glad you brought that up. Having worked under a couple of administrations, can you recall a time where things were quite as complex and divisive as it is now? And we'll get to Russia and Ukraine in a moment. That's another outlier that's in there. But I just can't imagine another time, or perhaps I didn't pay attention as much, but it seems as if it's just incredibly complex right now.
I think the world is becoming more complex every day for companies, for market participants, and for governments as well. It's not getting easier, it's getting harder. The complexities that you're dealing with, the ways that you're trying to enact policy, the ability to enact policy, let alone getting the policy right, I think is just getting harder. And I say that as someone who worked in administration during after 9/11 and during the global financial crisis. So I know what it was like then. It's more complex now, and also much harder. There's just one of the things that you have to deal with today is the breakdown in trust among voters too. And you can there'll be a lot of sociological papers by sociologists and others who will write about this as to why it's the case, but it is in fact the case. The lack of trust, and even the electorate out there, citizens in America today are really sour on the country. They're very sour on the economy, and today we did final GDP at 6.9%, so essentially 7% GDP growth in the fourth quarter. Unemployment rate is around 3.6%. Interest rates are really low. It's true that we have an inflation problem, but if it was just inflation right now is the real issue, and people are as upset as I've ever seen them. And they're treating it like this is 1970s style malaise, and that's not what we see. But that's all to say that people are upset by what they're seeing. They don't have confidence in institutions and government and policymakers and others. And so trying to do things in this environment is very, very tough. And as you said, we haven't even talked about a couple of the biggest things that governments are trying to deal with today with global strategic tension.
Right, and let's talk about that. There were signs of progress in negotiations as Russian Deputy Defense Minister announced that Russia will sharply reduce, quote, military activities around some of the major cities. And several U.S. officials have cast doubt on the Russian claims of retreat as fighting continues across the country. And Tony, what I think is so challenging with this, it almost feels like an expert level chess game. We're always trying to think one step ahead, two steps ahead, and it makes it really complex.
It really does, and especially in this case with a government that that you can't trust. They've said these kinds of things before, in not just once or twice, but multiple times. It's the way they conduct foreign policy. They don't do it in a truthful way. So we cannot trust what the Russians say about what they're doing or what their intentions are in Ukraine. We just have to trust what we see with our eyes and what the intelligence is telling us with what they're seeing on the ground. But we're going to be dealing with this for a very long time. And, the damage that Russia did is not an event. It is a change in Russia's relationship with its neighbors and with other global strategic adversaries or allies. Its relationship with China, certainly its relationship with the United States. It did permanent damage to its own economy and its relationship. It did some permanent damage to the rest of Europe also, because Europe is going to accelerate its shift in energy, and just its countries like Germany, for example, invested a lot of time and energy to try to bring Russia along to join this, democratic, free market community of nations. And Russia has, pretty emphatically slammed the door on that. So that investment of time and energy and even money, real investment money into Russia is going away. So this is going to be with us for a pretty long time.
Right. And speaking of Germany, I've often thought that Angela Merkel really was a stabilizing force. She did have somewhat of a cordial relationship with Putin. And I wonder, with her not being in the mix, if that removed some of the stabilization, or at least more a rational voice that he would respond to.
Yeah, we see President Macron from France try to step up, but it's not the same. I mean, Angela Merkel was a unique character on the global stage. She is someone who, actually grew up and lived in East Germany, so on the other side of the Iron Curtain, in a Warsaw Pact country. So she had that unique perspective of having grown up in as an ally of the Soviet Union, her country, not necessarily Angela Merkel herself. So she was able to do that. She had there was a different level of communication, and it's not clear that we have that with any of the European leaders today. But I don't think we should overstate that, that sort of personal relationship too much. I still think at the end of the day, Russia is acting the way Russia has acted for quite a long time, for centuries. Its relationship with its allies, it has always sought to have a dominant relationship with its countries. It's it feels that is in its national interest. It has been invaded before by by Napoleon and by Hitler, and so it remembers those things and sees the world differently. But it also has not seen that the world has changed quite a bit, and the world can change. We went through a couple centuries of the Germans and the French fighting each other. We went through centuries of the British and the French fighting each other, and they don't do that anymore. So there was a lot of hope that we wouldn't be having these kinds of engagements with the Russians as well. But Russia, I think, is acting its role that it has held for a pretty long time, and it's going to take time for it to change.
All right, Tony, we appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.